I never thought my own yard would feel like a crime scene. She marched up with cops calling my cabin public land, but the deed in my hand said otherwise. Her live stream hit 50,000. My folder hit harder. Let me take you back. The morning had been mine alone, or so I thought. Steam curled from the chipped mug in my hand as I leaned against the rail of the deck listening to the pine branches creak under the summer sun. A quiet rhythm, the kind you don't notice until it's about to be stolen. The wood beneath my elbow was warm, and every so often I nudged a loose board into place with the heel of my palm, promising myself I'd fix it properly before September. Beside me, my grandfather's pocket watch ticked steadily on the railing, its brass casing catching the light like it had a secret to keep. It was the one object that tied me to this cabin built in '62, handed down through deeds so worn the paper had turned the color of autumn leaves. I reached for the mug again when the steady crunch of gravel cut through the birdsong. Tamara Caldwell. You couldn't mistake her sharp-pressed blazer despite the August heat heels clicking like punctuation tablet clutched as if it were scripture. Behind her walked two uniformed officers, their expressions more tired than tense. And across the road, a neighbor paused over his grill spatula in hand, sausage smoke drifting toward us all. Mr. Colt, Tamara called loud enough for the rest of the street to hear. "We've got an issue." My son Tommy had come out onto the porch by then, hair unkempt, clutching the railing like it might tell him what to do. He was 17, old enough to sense when trouble was brewing, too young to know how to quiet the tremor in his jaw. Tamara didn't waste time. She thrust her tablet into the air, scrolling to some highlighted paragraph. According to Section 4.3 of the bylaws, this yard is not exclusively yours. It's communal property. You can't lock it off. Her voice carried with the confidence of someone who believed volume could substitute for truth. The officers exchanged a glance, one of them adjusting his belt with a sigh. I set my mug down, careful not to spill. The pine scent still lingered, but now it mingled with something sour, the tang of confrontation, the awareness that neighbors were turning toward us one by one. "Communal property?" I asked, my voice steady, quieter than hers. "That's new." She tapped the tablet again, then turned it outward for the cops, for Tommy, for the crowd. "It's all here. HOA records. We've logged complaints. We've documented usage. And if you continue to restrict access, we'll have no choice but to escalate." Escalate! The word hung in the air like smoke. From the corner of my eye, the watch ticked on relentless patient. My grandfather had kept it through blackouts, recessions, court battles over water rights. It had seen worse storms than this. Still, my chest tightened. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe if we could just take a quick look at your documentation." Tamara cut him off with a smirk. "Documentation, please. What Mr. Colt has are outdated papers. This land belongs to the HOA, and I'm making sure the community knows it." She turned her tablet toward her own phone camera, a live stream glowing red at the corner. That was when I realized the audience wasn't just the handful of neighbors sniffing at the sausage smoke. It was everyone Tamara's stream could reach. Tommy shifted, whispering, "Dad," as if the single syllable could carry a whole plea. I straightened, more tired than angry. The board beneath my heel creaked again, reminding me of the repairs waiting the everyday life I'd thought was mine to protect. "Public land," Tamara declared, raising her chin, effective immediately. A ripple ran through the crowd, half gasps, half muttered approval. The sizzle from the neighbor's grill popped like a period at the end of her sentence. I let the silence linger a moment. Then I reached for the folder I'd set on the patio chair earlier, thick with photocopies, stamped seals, a lineage of signatures. The leather edges pressed against my palm, warm from the sun. The gate at the edge of the yard stood closed, chain latch snug. I walked down the steps, each one groaning under my weight the way old wood does when asked to bear more than it should. Tamara angled her phone toward me, the officers following half a step behind. I unhooked the latch with a deliberate click and swung the gate wide. The crowd shifted forward, sensing theater. Holding the folder up, I said, "Let's see what the law really says." And in the corner of my vision, the brass watch still glinted on the railing, ticking away the fragile peace I'd woken to only minutes earlier. At first light, someone tapped the screen door, not hard, two careful knocks as if they didn't want to disturb the hinges. I was already awake, nursing coffee gone lukewarm, when Earl Morrison's silhouette filled the frame. He held a manila envelope to his chest the way a man clutches a Bible in a storm. "This should have come out 40 years ago," he whispered when I let him in. The cabin still smelled faintly of varnish from the repairs I'd done the week before. Sun angled through the pines and slanted across the old butcher block table, painting gold bars on the wood. Earl stood in that light like it had been looking for him, Up close, I could see the tremor in his hands had nothing to do with age. "Sit," I said, and he did, slowly lowering the envelope as if it might bruise. Tommy came down the hall, barefoot, hair sticking up, phone already in his palm. He took one look at Earl, then at the envelope, and put the phone face down. Earl smoothed the flap with a thumb. The adhesive had bubbled and given up in places. A rusty paperclip kept it shut. "I worked as a county surveyor in the 80s, he said, eyes on his thumb like he was reading from it. Back when a developer named Jonathan Hayes was turning pasture into planned community." He slid the envelope across. It rasped over the table, heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. Inside were maps folded into tired squares, deeds gone the color of toast, and photocopied transcripts that still smelled faintly of ammonia from whatever machine had birthed them. Dust motes rose and did a slow dance in the sunbeam. Tommy eased onto the bench beside me, curiosity prying his shoulders forward. "Is this?" he started. "Proof," Earl said, not letting him finish. Or what passed for it when men wanted progress more than truth. He adjusted his glasses and pulled out the top map, an aerial with hand-inked lines and marginal notes in a tidy script I didn't recognize. "Hayes altered surveys," he said. "Just enough to shift fence lines into common space. Said it would raise values. Folks believed him, or wanted to." I traced a finger along a boundary that should have been straight but kinked like a bent nail. "You knew," I suspected Earl said. Then I knew. I tried a quiet word with the recorder's office and got told not to worry myself. He huffed something that might have been a laugh. Hard to tell a young man with a briefcase that a ditch he's never stepped over means more than a line on his paper. He handed me a deed, my grandfather's name in fountain pen blue, the county seal embossed so deep it raised a blister. Beside it, a photocopied transcript, meeting with J. Hayes, New Verse 1985. The typed lines staggered slightly as though whoever typed them had been bumping along a gravel road. Tommy leaned, close eyes scanning. "Is there audio?" he asked. Earl nodded toward the envelope's bottom. "Cassette tapes," he said softly. "Your granddad recorded what he could." When Hayes realized he wasn't the only one keeping files, threats started. He looked up at me then. "Your grandfather chose to wait. Said the truth would outlive the men who buried it." I couldn't help it. My gaze slid to the pocket watch on the shelf, the hairline crack in its crystal reflecting the morning light like a seam in ice. The cabin settled around the three of us, wood sighing, kettle ticking as it cooled. Tommy lifted another map, this one with the creek sketched in blue pencil and property numbers circled in red. "These look older than the subdivision," he said. "They are," Earl answered. "Pre-development survey 62. Done honest. Before the marketing brochures." He tapped the corner. "See that hash mark? That's the old marker at the cottonwood stump." "I've seen it," I said. "Every boy who grows up in a place learns where the true corners live, under rocks and notches on bedrock at trees that remember more than we do." Earl palmed a thin stack of photocopied emails next modern intruders among the onion skin and linen stock. Names I recognized blinked from the header's county staff whose signatures still appeared on notices and minutes. He didn't read them aloud, just let the dates and subject lines do their quiet work. A small silence settled, the kind that belongs to decisions. Outside, a jay scraped a metal note from the porch rail. Inside, Earl's breathing counted seconds. Tommy broke it. "We can scan everything," he said, reaching for his phone again. "Digitize, cross-reference parcel IDs, geotag the old markers. Even if they moved lines on paper, GPS can." "Son," Earl said gently, and there was pride in the word, not just caution. "Do it, but there's more." He slid his thumb under the envelope's frayed inner seam and teased up a flap I hadn't noticed, a kind of hidden pocket. From inside, he drew a tiny plastic sleeve. A USB drive lay within, cheap, translucent, the kind you get at bank giveaways. Earl set it on the table like he'd just put down a live match. "I didn't know this was here till last winter," he said. "Found it when I went to move the papers to a safer place. Labels mostly rubbed off, but I think your granddad touched it more than once." Tommy had the laptop open before Earl finished. He slid the drive in gently, as if a hard push might erase history. The machine chimed. A directory bloomed, dated folders, scanned PDFs. WAV files with names like Hayes Meeting 3 and Recorder Call Jan. "Holy," Tommy breathed. He didn't finish the thought. We started with a PDF original survey, 1962, Colt parcel. The lines were clean, the measurements written in a draftsman's careful hand. I could smell the ink, even though I knew I couldn't. Tommy overlaid it quickly with a low-res image from the county GIS site, The sort of map you pull up on your phone when you want to argue with a fence. 2 outlines nested and misaligned like a bad shadow. "Zoom," I said. He did. The eastern boundary of our lot. My lot extended a shade further than the current map allowed. The shape of it kissed the footprint of a house up the lane. "Wait," Tommy said, voice suddenly thin. He pulled another file. Survey altered 1986 and set it side by side. "They trimmed here," he whispered. 3.2 feet at the setback here. And, Dad, look. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Earl lifted his glasses and cleaned them with the hem of his sweater, then set them carefully on his nose again. "Read the parcel number," he said. Tommy read it. The number matched the address I had stared at across meetings and mailers and live streams for months. "Overlay them," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a man on a ladder telling himself not to look down. Tommy dragged the layers, transparent ghosts merging. On our table beneath the morning sun, the same color it must have been in 1962, the truth aligned the house. Tamara, Caldwell called hers, sat partly over my ground, her front walk nibbling at what the original survey named for my grandfather. A quiet, undeniable theft you could trace with a finger. Earl exhaled a sound I'd only heard from men coming out of long water. "Your granddad tried to stop it," he said. "He couldn't without burning everything. Maybe we can now without the fire." I thought of the open gate, the notice in my pocket, the way the neighbors' faces had hardened into rolls. I thought of my father sitting at this very table showing me how to read a tape measure and telling me there's more honesty in a straight line than most people can stand. Tommy clicked into one of the audio files. The laptop's little speakers crackled. A man's voice, Hayes, I guessed, spoke in the confident middle register of someone used to being believed. "If we shift a few boundaries for common use now, nobody will complain when the amenities arrive." Another voice, lower, uncertain. Papers rustled. Somewhere in the room, a clock ticked that wasn't ours. I closed my eyes for one beat too, then opened them and pointed back to the map. "We'll need chain of custody," I said, habit returning like a tool to a palm. "Metadata. A clean copy of everything. We'll do it," Tommy said, already naming folders. Earl watched us with a relief that made him look years younger. "I was wrong to wait," he said. "I'm sorry for that." "You waited so the truth could live," I said. "That counts." We sat there, the three of us, as a dust motes crossed from one bar of sunlight to another. Outside, a truck downshifted on Penrest Lane. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then gave up. I felt something in me turn from anger to purpose, a slow hinge closing on the right door. Tommy pinched and zoomed the map again, then froze. His mouth opened, closed, opened. He looked at me, then at Earl, then back at the screen where parcels had stopped being shapes and become a kind of confession. "Dad?" He blurted, his voice cracking on the word. "If this is right, she's the trespasser." Marcus showed up with a briefcase and a grin that tried to pretend this was just another Tuesday. We shook hands on the porch like we always had, old job sites, busted knuckles, the kind of friendship that survives silence. Inside, the living room glowed a soft blue from Tommy's laptop folders stacked like small monuments across the coffee table. "Let me see what we're working with," Marcus said, loosening his tie. He never needed the tie with me. He wore it for courtrooms and courage. Tommy slid the laptop between us. The directory bloomed dates, parcel numbers, final files that had clearly gone through too many finals. "These," Tommy said, "are the original survey scans from the county microfilm. These are the altered ones. And this," he tapped a folder labeled Audio. "These are meetings. Hayes. Recorder's office, maybe a county supervisor." Marcus's eyebrows ticked up. "You're telling me you've got chain of custody on a 40-year paper trail in a shoebox and a USB stick from a bank giveaway?" "Pretty much," I said. He smiled without mirth. "Best kind." I reached for my pocket watch habit when thinking, and it slid off the stack of maps where I'd laid it. The watch kissed the edge of the table, then the pine floor. The sound was smaller than I expected, more personal. When I picked it up, a hairline fracture ran across the crystal like a winter creek. From outside, the faint whir of a drone deepened and nosed toward the window. A red eye blinked in the reflection of the glass, then steadied. Tommy leaned back enough to catch it with his phone. "She's back?" he said. Marcus didn't turn. "Let her film," he murmured, eyes on the screen. "She's making my job easier." We dove in. Tommy lined the 1962 survey alongside a later amendment, the kind with cleaner fonts and dirtier intentions. Marcus traced the offsets with a capped pen, lips moving as he did quick math. I skimmed a thread of emails that leaped decades, a scanned memo banged out on a typewriter, then modern messages where subject lines carried the genealogy of a bad idea. Setback, clarification. RE. Setback, clarification. FWD. Setback, clarification. Somewhere in that relay, the truth had been folded small enough to fit a pocket. The drone's pitch shifted as it crept closer. On the screen, red light pulsed against the night mode lens. Marcus jotted notes. A small smear of sweat formed at the base of his thumb and printed itself on the top sheet. "Okay," he said, tapping. "This overlay is not subtle. You can drive a truck through the difference if you had a judge who still believes lines mean something." Outside, Tamara's voice floated in, amplified by whatever mic she'd bought this week. She was narrating Hughes. Notice the non-compliant structure she purred for her viewers sitting where our community greenway is meant to flow. Greenway, Marcus repeated as if tasting the word. Sounds prettier than, "I want your yard." The drone drifted sideways, finding the window's sweet spot. It wasn't just looking, it was auditioning angles. I rose without thinking and drew the curtain part way, but the lens found me anyway, my face reflected in it like a wary animal. Tommy clicked open one of the audio files. Hayes's voice, again smoother here, rehearsed. "Shift a boundary and call it cohesion. Homeowners prefer stories to lines." Papers rustled. Another voice coughed. Marcus exhaled through his nose. "Her footage may bury her," he said, nodding at the hovering insect outside. "Unauthorized surveillance, private property, no consent. She's documenting her own pattern. Sometimes the best evidence arrives with a bow." A body cam chime peeled from a clip I hadn't realized Marcus had requested. The officer's video from yesterday was already in his inbox. He watched a snip at me at the gate, Tamara invoking Section 4.3 with the confidence of a stage cue. Marcus paused, rewound, watched again. "Good," he said. "Her words, not yours." The drone sidled lower so close its prop wash fluttered a sticky note off the edge of a deed copy. I picked the note up and saw Tommy's scribble compare GIS to 1962. Record GPS of markers. My grandfather would have liked the neatness of the plan. Then the laptop pinged, and Tommy winced. The screen split on one side our documents. On the other, a feed someone had already clipped and uploaded our living room bleached by the drone's auto-exposure papers splayed like confetti. The caption read, "Illegal squat cabin man refuses to comply." Someone had added a laughing emoji. Someone else had typed, "Tear it down." I felt my jaw set the way steel does when you bend it to a new purpose. "They're inside my house without stepping in," I said. "That's the trick," Marcus replied quietly. "They make you feel like a defendant before you see a courtroom." We listened to another audio-phone call where a clerk's voice flattened into policy. "Records transferred during system update." The phrase thudded like a closing drawer. Tommy synced file metadata with scanned margins, clicking softly, jaw working. "Stop there," Marcus said. He pointed at a date stamp half hidden under an initial. "That's after the so-called community formation. They changed the map to fit the narrative, not the other way around." He stopped pen still. "We're not just winning a fence line, we're pulling a nail out of the neighborhood's spine." The drone tilted. A bright rectangle washed our faces. Somewhere out on the lane, a car door shut without hurry. Tamara's laughter light practiced breezed through the screen. She was still performing for her audience, and I could admit now for us. "Can we take that down?" I asked, nodding toward the upload calling me a squatter in my own living room. "We'll preserve it first," Marcus said. "Then we'll talk to the platform and the county. But I want every second of her footage dated geotagged and notarized if I can swing it." The watch on the table caught the drone's beam. The crack in the crystal flashed and settled like a wound that knew it would scar. I slipped the watch back into my pocket, feeling the drag of its new imperfection against the fabric. Dad, Tommy, said, "Look." He had overlaid the parcel lines again this time with a faded photo of the cottonwood stump Earl had mentioned. The GIS layer bowed where the stump didn't. The truth was stubborn in places. The feed labeled illegal squat ticked higher in views. Comments multiplied, a second crowd gathering faster than the first had dispersed. I scrolled a few without meaning to familiar names, unfamiliar bravery in the anonymity of a red dot. People liked the spectacle of a man losing something he loved as long as it looked inevitable. Marcus set his pen down and looked at me, then at Tommy. "Stay boring," he said. "Boring wins. No shouting, no pushing. Keep copying, keep scanning, and when she says something wrong, let her say it twice on camera." He snapped his briefcase shut, then reopened it, pulled out a thin file and slid it to me. Affidavit, template. Write what you know as if you're telling it to a neighbor over a fence because you are. We'll add exhibits later. The drone shifted again. The curtain tugged inward. Somewhere outside, metal skittered on metal like screws poured onto a tailgate. Tommy and I looked at each other. Marcus cocked his head, listening. "Do you hear that?" The laptop chimed once more. On the feed, our living room flickered, then settled. On the lane, a truck idled. The whir at the window rose, then slid sideways along the siding. I stood without meaning to and crossed to the door. The afternoon had ripened. Light lay heavy on the gravel. In the distance, a flatbed was easing to a stop near my drive. Men in safety vests began to hop down one after another the way nails come out of a pouch, efficient, inevitable. A metallic clang rang out as they dropped the first bundle to the ground, galvanized posts banded tight for delivery. Another bundle followed, and another, each landing with a hollow note that traveled up my porch boards and into my teeth. Behind me, Tommy's screen still showed our papers and the drone's bleached window. In my pocket, the cracked watch ticked like it was counting a shorter kind of time. "Fence posts," Marcus said, joining me at the threshold. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Out by the flatbed, a man lifted a post and shouldered it like a certainty. Another clang. Another. The sound stitched the afternoon together, one metallic syllable at a time. The sound woke me before the light did a grinding whine, metal chewing metal, the kind of noise that tells you whatever it is will not be undone easily. I swung my legs from the bed and felt grit under my feet, yesterday's dust claiming today. When I pulled, the curtain sparks were already stitching the dawn. Dad Tommy said from the doorway, hair flattened on one side, phone up. She started at 4. A welder's arc flared white-blue at the edge of the yard where our grass met gravel. Men in vests moved with practiced indifference, stringing a chalk line, bracing posts, feeding wire through a machine that sang misery. An 8-foot steel fence grew like a bad idea you couldn't stop once it found its funding. The air tasted like hot coin. Every few seconds, the welder lifted his mask and shouted an instruction I couldn't hear over the noise. A flatbed idled at the curb stacks of panels banded in silver. 2 houses down the Patterson roses hung their heads, petals blackening where stray sparks had touched. "Tommy," I said, careful with my voice, "start recording from the sidewalk. Get the line. Get the gate." He was already moving, slipping into shoes, sliding past me with a sharp nod. "I've got it." His lens found the details, the keypad box mounted to the new post, the cable trench carving a scar across the lane, the contractor's clipboard with a stamped header that looked official if you didn't squint. I went out barefoot, the porch boards holding last night's cool. The foreman glanced at me, then passed me like I was a tree that would be cut later. "Morning," he said, not stopping. "We'll be out of your way soon." He said it kindly, which made it worse. "Whose order?" I asked. He tapped his clipboard. HOA. Emergency Installation. Safety and Access Control. I let the words sit there until they said what they wanted, until they sounded as hollow to him as they did to me. Behind us, a neighbor tried to back out of his driveway and discovered a brand new wall where only air had been. He leaned on his horn, then let it go rolling forward an inch like the fence might notice his patience and move. "Marcus," I called into the house. He answered from the kitchen where the coffee gurgled like a consolation prize. By the time he joined me on the porch, Tommy had panned to catch Mrs. Patterson stepping into her yard, clippers in hand, eyes wet and bright. "My roses," she said to no one and everyone at once. A strand of wire grazed the trellis. A shower of sparks freckled the mulch. She cupped a ruined bloom thumb, coming away soot-streaked. Marcus took it in the arc light, the keypad, the trench, the faces. He flipped open his notebook. "False imprisonment," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and an unpermitted obstruction across driveways. We document, we notify, we act." He didn't tell me to stay calm. He didn't need to. Calm was the only weapon I could hold without dropping. By 8, the fence had cut the block into rectangles of compliance. Our lane turned into a corral with a single new gate at the far end keypad blinking a smug green. The men threaded cable through conduit and laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. A bright sticker on the gate read, "Property of Pinerest Community Association." The paint on the word community hadn't dried. A thumbprint smudged the Y. Tommy trotted back, breath tight. They said deliveries will be coordinated by request, he reported like a news stringer who couldn't believe the copy he was filing. "Who do we request to visit the mailbox?" "Take the numbers off the keypad," Marcus said. "Make sure we can show the brand and model." We listen to the block, find its panic, someone on the phone with a boss explaining why they couldn't leave. A kid crying because the fence made the street look like a video game level. An older man whose oxygen supplier couldn't get past the padlock. The idling truck coughed smoke. The roses sagged further. The foreman approached, tipping his hard hat with 2 fingers. "We're activating the gate," he said. "So, if you need to exit, you'll have to call the HOA for a temporary code. Should just be temporary while we get, usage under control." "Under control," I repeated. The watch in my pocket clicked. The cracked crystal caught on the seam of the fabric like a nail. I pictured my grandfather at the edge of a pasture when someone brought a machine to tell him what a fence meant. "Sir," the foreman said, "I'm just the contractor." "I know I said, and this will be in your invoice." He didn't argue. He walked away, relief visible in the soften of his shoulders. Tommy moved along the fence, filming as the last panel slid into its slot with a smug metal sigh. On the far side, Mrs. Patterson put down her clippers and pressed her palms together like a prayer might turn the panel back into morning air. "Please," she told the foreman, "please at least not through the roses." He made a note without looking up. At 9:30, the keypad chirped for the first time, a bright little beep that announced the end of more than one thing. The foreman keyed in 4 digits and the gate rolled shut on new hinges. The lane fell quiet in the way a held breath is quiet. "Locked," Tommy said. His camera caught the tiny LED flipping from amber to red, a dot smaller than a freckle deciding fates. Marcus nodded once. "Okay," he said, voice tightening. "There it is." The moment had the weight of ceremony. No words, no flag, no pledge, just a steel line across a neighborhood and the lightest sound in the world to make it final. "Papers," Marcus said to me. "I'll draft the emergency filings. But first we get the people together. Power lives where eyes meet." Mrs. Patterson stepped closer to the fence and found it less forgiving than a trellis. She flinched at the heat it still held. "I can't get to my sister," she whispered. "She's expecting me." A shadow of ash crossed her cheekbone, where she'd brushed hair back with a dirty glove. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently. "We're going to fix this." He didn't promise a day. Whitaker arrived at the gate with a reusable grocery bag and discovered the keypad wanted a code and didn't respect fruit. He glanced toward Tamara's house. Tommy's camera found him at the moment his certainty changed shape. Across the street, a voice rose from an upstairs window, the tone that says this is not a drill to whoever is listening. A dog barked once, twice, then understood its perimeter had changed and stopped. My phone buzzed with a special assessment notice new levy for enhanced security infrastructure due in 30 days. The amount sat on the screen like a dare. I slid the phone into my pocket with the watch. The 2 objects knocked once as if greeting each other darkly. "Marcus," I said low. "This feels like a choke point." "It is," he said. They pulled the oldest stunt. "Build the wall, argue the permit later. Make the violation loud, then muffle the correction." He closed the notebook. "We bring daylight." Round us the block went still. The foreman raised his arm and gave a little spin to the last bolt to flourish at the end of his part. The keypad blinked again, content. I looked at Tommy, at the neighbors who didn't know whether to gather or scatter at the roses that had changed their minds about blooming. The cracked watch ticked against my palm like a reminder a clock can be both wound and broken. I breathed in metal and singed petals and old pine. Then I said the only thing that made sense to the man I still hoped I was. "We call a meeting," I told Marcus, the fence, the camera, the morning. "Tonight." The sound of folding chairs scraping across varnished wood is its own kind of drumroll. By the time I stepped into the elementary school gym, the bleachers were already half full. Neighbors in Sunday polos, reporters with shoulder rigs, kids swinging their feet and shushed by parents. Fluorescent lights hummed. The projector added its own throatier purr. The place smelled like paper gym dust and nerves. Tamara stood down front as if she'd been cast, fingers resting on a wireless clicker ankled in a power stance that read well to a camera. She'd brought easels with enlarged maps and a rolling podium dressed in HOA letterhead like a costume. Behind her, the first slide waited, "Protecting our community heritage," in a font that loved itself. Earl sat 2 rows back, the manila envelope clutched to his ribs. He kept glancing at the exit as if it might move. Tommy threaded cables to the AV cart, whispering to the volunteer who guarded the HDMI port like a temple relic. He checked our stream, tapped twice, gave me a small nod. "Live." Marcus arrived, last tie straight, briefcase bumping his knee. "Breathe," he murmured, not looking at me. Tamara didn't need a gavel. "We're here," she announced, letting her voice lift into the rafters because standards require courage. She clicked. Drone footage filled the screen. Our cabin smeared flat by auto exposure. Colored overlays traced property lines like veins. As you can see, she cooed the unpermitted structure encroaches on shared greenway. We attempted voluntary compliance. We were met with obstruction. Pockets of the crowd nodded the way people do when they want the show to be over quickly and with a villain. My pocket watch pressed against my thigh, its crack catching on cloth when I shifted. Tamara clicked again a montage of fences and footpaths, words like heritage and value floating over shots of children riding bikes. She paused the video to let applause have a chance. It didn't arrive. She smiled anyway, the smile of someone who thinks applause will catch up if you hold the moment still. "Thank you, Ms. Caldwell," the PTA president said from the side, performing neutrality. "We'll now hear a response." Marcus didn't stride. He drifted unthreatening as a librarian. He plugged the laptop in. The projector blinked, then replaced Tamara's palette with a scan of our deed, the embossed seal raised enough to catch light even in pixels. "This is the Colt parcel deed, recorded 1962, he said, voice easy. "You'll notice the county seal and the surveyor's attestation." He let silence do its big work. "We'll move through a few exhibits. I won't belabor." He didn't. He clicked to the original survey lines like a hymn, then to a later amendment where the hymn had grown a cough. "Now we overlay," he said, and Tommy's cursor slid one map over another. The gasp when it came sounded like air rediscovering lungs. "Minnie Cliff." A reporter's pen stopped mid-scratch. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." Marcus nodded toward the audio folder. "Brief excerpt," he said. "For context, not for spectacle." Tommy hit play. Hayes's voice filled the gym, tinny but certain. "If we shift a few boundaries for common use now, nobody will complain when the amenities arrive." Papers rustled across decades. Another man cleared his throat like a man about to trade a small truth for a larger comfort. Marcus didn't look at Tamara. He let the crowd look instead. "We have more," he said mildly, "but you don't need me to narrate what your eyes are telling you. The record shows that the HOA's authority rests on altered lines. Law likes lines. So do communities." Earl rose as if the bench had finally let him go. He carried the envelope down the aisle in two hands and stopped beside the projector cart. "I should have said this sooner," he told the room voice wearing both apology and permission. "I worked as county surveyor when the maps were changed. I kept copies. I kept quiet. That's on me." The paper in his hands quivered once, then settled. But this he pointed to the old survey on the screen is honest, and this he touched the amended outline isn't. It wasn't eloquent. It didn't need to be. The gym's murmurs loosened, then rose like surf coming back in after a long curiosity. Tamara tried to laugh. "A conspiracy theory?" she asked the ceiling. "We're really doing this." She clicked back to her drone footage as if a fresh anchor could tow the room. The footage looked smaller now, no matter how big she made it. The county recorder stood a woman with a badge clipped at a tidy angle and a tone that had settled more meetings than all our heat could start. "For the record," she said, "my office has examined the exhibits provided tonight. The documentation indicates multiple property transfers relied on altered surveys." She let the words find each ear. "Effective immediately, those transfers and any HOA actions dependent on them are suspended pending formal correction." The gym breathed out. Micro-climax hit like a soft gavel. A man near the back sobbed once into his hands and pretended it was a cough. Mrs. Patterson gripped the back of a chair so hard the vinyl squeaked. Tamara's smile collapsed at one corner. "You can't just—" "You don't," she sputtered, then found a note high enough to cut. "This is a smear. It's coordinated. It's—" She fished for a word big enough and landed on the one that had been waiting for her. "Conspiracy." The word didn't bounce. It fell. Reporters didn't need the cue. Cameras rose. The PTA president tried to thank everyone for their civility and failed to locate any. The projector hummed on, bathing the deed in indifferent light, seal gleaming. Tommy's stream spiked numbers on the corner of his screen chat, scrolling with "I knew it," and "We're dealing with this too," and a dozen versions of "How do we check our maps?" Marcus closed the laptop gently, as if tucking a child in. "We'll coordinate with the recorder," he told me then, louder to the room, "and we'll make copies of everything. You'll get your boundaries back. We'll do it in daylight." Minnie Cliff. A power flicker shivered the lights. The projector sighed, then recovered. The room wobbled with the kind of collective humor that says "not now," and somehow steadied. We filtered into the hallway past trophy cases and laminated art. People stopped us to press our hands, to apologize, to confess that they'd believed whatever had been easiest to believe until it wasn't. Earl stood with two men I didn't know and showed them a crease on the oldest map like it was where he'd hidden his fear and found it again. Outside air that had remembered rain touched our faces. I could hear the fence before I could see it, the thud of panel against panel, the proud beep of a keypad, tested and approved. The night smelled faintly of cut grass and hot metal cooling. Tamara stormed past with her entourage phone high, face tilted to catch a streetlight. Conspiracy. She flung one last time and made sure her microphone liked it. We rounded the corner. Under the same moon that had watched our gym pretend to be a courtroom, the steel line across our lane had grown 2 more sections taller now, where it shouldn't have been new posts pinning down old pavement as if the night itself had voted. Tommy lifted his phone without a word. I felt the cracked watch tick at my wrist, a flaw that remembered each beat counting us from spectacle toward something heavier, and if we were lucky, truer. The morning news vans coughed and idled like old dogs chained at the curb. Antennas rose into the air, dishes turning as if the sky might deliver more scandal. Out beyond my cabin, the steel fence now carried a keypad gate, its red light blinking like a stubborn wound. Each time someone tried the keys, the lock beeped sharp, arrogant. Inside Earl's living room, the smell of stale coffee and mothballs clung to the curtains. The place looked like time had been storing up its receipts, newspapers piled floorboards creaking and complaint photographs tucked crooked in dusty frames. Tommy had already spread a portable tripod in the corner, his phone balanced steady as a broadcast tower. Earl shuffled from the back room with a large flat roll tied in string. His steps were lighter than last week, and though his hands shook, his eyes held a clear spark. This, he said, lowering himself into a sagging armchair, wasn't meant to sit in a drawer 40 years. The paper unfurled, yellow edges curling upward, a hand-drawn survey in fading blue ink. I leaned over the coffee table, tracing the lines with my finger. My grandfather's cabin. The parcel sat, neat boundaries clear, and then the fence, a new ugly scar running across it like graffiti. Earl tapped the paper with a knuckle. "That gate," he said, voice brittle but sure, "doesn't touch common land. It's yours. Always was." Tommy zoomed the camera down, letting the live stream capture the map. "Dad, comments are blowing up," he whispered. "They're saying people in other towns are watching." His phone buzzed as if carrying a pulse. The door rattled under a polite knock. 2 men in blazers ties straight despite the heat stepped in with a younger woman carrying a leather tube. They introduced themselves as federal surveyors and investigators. Behind them, the low rumble of black SUVs lingered outside the cul-de-sac. Earl rose, surprising even himself. "Gentlemen," he said, passing the map across with both hands as if offering a fragile relic. The agent unrolled it carefully on the coffee table, smoothing corners with practiced precision. The younger surveyor bent, measuring with her pen, sliding a plastic overlay against the map's lines. "Gates in violation," she said finally, her voice as crisp as the paper she wrote on. "It cuts across Colt property, no question." The older agent nodded once, noting in his binder. "This falls under federal fraud review given the altered plats. We'll be expanding the scope." His tone carried no drama, but the words filled the small room like thunder anyway. Outside, the gate clanged as reporters jostled for angles. Tommy's feed caught the muffled chant of neighbors beginning to gather, their voices swelling with relief. Earl sagged back into his chair, exhaling as if some stone had at last rolled off his chest. 40 years too late, he murmured, pressing the map into the agent's hands. But it ends now. The micro-climax hung there, his confession transformed into closure. His eyes, wet at the corners, searched mine as though to ask forgiveness for the decades of silence. I gave a slight nod, the kind a son might give a weary father. Reporters' questions leaked in through the cracked windows. "Is it true? What happens next?" A news generator hummed steadily outside, its fuel stink faint through the screen. Earl's old floorboards creaked under our shifting weight. The cracked pocket watch in my palm ticked stubbornly. For the first time in weeks, I imagined it whole again. As the agents filed out with the map, Tommy turned the camera back toward me, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of proof at last. I opened my mouth to speak, but before words could form, Marcus burst through the door jacket half off. "Tamara's gone," he said flatly. "Her rental's empty. Neighbors say movers came in the night." The room tilted, every noise magnified, the hum of the generator, the clanging gate, Earl's uneven breath. She hadn't waited for a verdict. She'd written her own exit. I closed the watch gently, its crack catching the light. "Then the story isn't finished," I said. And the weight of that silence pressed down, waiting for what tomorrow might bring. The smell of charcoal drifted across Pinerest Lane, carried on the easy wind of late summer. Where the steel fence once stood, long tables stretched in both directions, covered in bowls of potato salad, crock pots humming, and foil trays stacked with ribs. Neighbors leaned over with paper plates, laughter carrying across the grass like a sound we'd forgotten we knew how to make. The green belonged to us again. Children chased each other through the open stretch, their shoes kicking up dry leaves. Someone had strung yellow lights between trees, and the bulbs blinked awake as dusk settled. I felt the repaired band of my grandfather's pocket watch against my wrist, its steady tick faint, but present a reminder of time restored. Earl sat in a folding chair beside me, a plate untouched on his lap. His shoulders, once bent with guilt, seemed lighter. "Never thought I'd see this ground free again," he said, nodding toward the space where the gate had cut through. His voice trembled not from age, but from release. Tommy darted past with a burger in hand, calling over his shoulder. "Dad, they just posted the arrest feed." Tamara's in cuffs at Denver International phones lit up around the tables, gasps rising, then cheers. Some clapped, others hugged, and one neighbor even popped the cork on a dusty bottle of wine saved for better times. Marcus raised his voice above the chatter. "Folks County's ready." He gestured to the officials standing near a folding podium. Stacks of paper sat bound with red tape. One by one, names were called. Families stepped forward to receive deeds that had hung in limbo for decades. Hands shook signatures, scratched, and applause followed each exchange. When my name was read, I walked slowly up, feeling every eye on me. The county clerk pressed the folder into my palms, the seal embossed deep enough to feel through the paper. "Mr. Colt," she said with a smile, "this land has always been yours. We're only putting it back where it belongs." As I returned to my seat, neighbors reached out pats on the shoulder, hands squeezed in gratitude. The applause rose again this time, louder, not for me alone, but for all of us who'd weathered the storm. Later, as the sun melted into the horizon, a small ceremony took place. New bylaws were read aloud, shorter and kinder, promising transparency, fair voting, and limits on power. Earl signed first, then Marcus, then, one by one, the community. When the last signature dried, Tommy tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, it's time." I stood and lifted my wrist. The repaired pocket watch clicked its glass face whole again, reflecting the glow of sunset. I fastened it carefully, letting the clasp snap shut. A hush fell, then neighbors clapped, some whistling, some wiping eyes. The applause rolled over me not as triumph, but as relief, like a tide retreating after a storm. Earl leaned close, voice barely a whisper. "Your grandfather would have been proud." I looked toward the cabin, its wooden beams catching the last gold of the day. For the first time in years, it didn't look fragile. It looked enduring. As plates emptied and kids curled up on picnic blankets, Tommy sat beside me. His hair caught the firelight from a nearby grill. He spoke softly, almost shy. "Dad, what would Grandpa say now, T?" I let the silence hold us for a moment. The watch ticked against my skin, steady whole. My eyes traveled to the cabin, to the neighbors, to the map of the community we'd redrawn together. He'd say, "The truth stood." I answered, and for the first time, I believed it would keep standing.